Thanks, Joan Home, for joining us this hour. Have you ever heard of a man named Gerald L.K. Smith? If you haven't, you are forgiven. He is no longer a famous figure, but in his day, he was a famous-ish guy, a preacher and political figure. At one point, he ran for Senate in Michigan as a Republican. In 1944, he ran for president against FDR. He ran on the ticket of the America First Party, which he had founded. Gerald L.K. Smith did not get far with that presidential bid or with the Michigan Senate bid as a Republican either. If Gerald L.K. Smith is remembered for anything today, it's probably mostly for this. This is a statue that he erected in Arkansas in the 1960s. It's called Christ of the Ozarks. Christ of the Ozarks was the subject of a suspiciously huge fundraising operation by Gerald L.K. Smith. He died in 1976, but that statue still stands in Arkansas today. But Gerald L.K. Smith is about to have another moment in the public eye, because what he really wanted to be remembered for, even more than that statue, was a nationwide movement that he tried to build, a movement that he named and that he led and that he promoted tirelessly and that he wanted to outlive him forever.
Motive behind the term Christian nationalist is easy to define and simple to interpret. We believe that the destiny of America in relationship to its governing authority must be kept in the hands of our own people. We must never be governed by aliens. We must keep control of our own money and our own blood. In other words, we must remain true to the Declaration of Independence. That is nationalism. We believe that the spiritual symbol of our statesmanship is the cross, which indeed is the symbol of Christianity. We believe that the inspiring dynamic out of which America grew is Christianity. We believe that there would be no real America such as we love and for which we're willing to die if there had been no Christianity. Thus, when a Christian is a nationalist, he becomes necessarily a Christian nationalist.
A Christian nationalist. That was Gerald L.K. Smith speaking in the 1950s as both a sort of pseudo-preacher and a political figure on the American right. He was the spokesman and the founder for this movement that he called Christian nationalism. And if that is ringing a bell for you at all, if it feels, despite the annoying music bed with that speech and the guy's weird speaking style and all that, if that language that he was using feels like it rhymes a little bit with today's news, you are right about that.
Republicans really need to recognize the people they represent. Okay, their voters, not the lobbyist donors, not the corporate PACs, not those people. That's not who the Republican Party should represent. We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian, and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
We should be Christian nationalists. You are seeing that phrase and that sort of branding from the Trumpiest members of Congress. That's Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. You're also seeing it all over the place in headlines now about the way the Trumpiest part of the Republican Party is kind of branding itself these days. Christian nationalism on the rise in Republican campaigns. Christian nationalism is reshaping the Republican Party. The reason this Christian nationalism thing is an awkward fit, the reason it's maybe not going to be an easy path for today's Republican Party, or at least it shouldn't be an easy path for today's Republican Party to bring this back, is because they're not inventing this phrase for the first time. And we're not ignorant to history, and we know what it meant the last time, right? Christian nationalism is not a new concept. It's not a new American right-wing political concept. The reason this ought to be awkward for them to try to bring it back is because the last time, as a country, we tried that on with guys like Gerald L.K. Smith leading the way, they were really not shy in saying exactly what they meant by it. So I'm going to play you a little more Gerald L.K. Smith here. I apologize in advance for the annoying music bed coming back, but also specifically for the content of what you're about to hear him say.
Subversive forces, exploiting sentimental nitwits, are reading into the Constitution a code of conduct which threatens to mongrelize our race, destroy our racial self-respect, and enslave the white man. Fight mongrelization and all attempts being made to force the intermixture of the black and white races. Preserve America as a Christian nation, being conscious of the fact that there is a highly organized campaign to substitute Jewish tradition for Christian tradition. The most powerful Jewish organization in America is the Anti-Defamation League, which has launched a campaign to remove from all public schools any songbook which contains a Christmas carol or any other hymn which mentions the name of Jesus.
They're coming for the kids. They're coming for the public schools. They've infiltrated the public schools with their anti-Christian. Christian nationalism. Gerald L.K. Smith, the leader of the Christian nationalist movement, speaking in the 1950s. He was the leader of that movement in this country in the World War II era, around the time he was running for president. He was also a leader of that movement in the post-World War II era. And I have to tell you, what I just played you, that's kind of the mild stuff from him. The stuff about the Jews taking over the world and how Americans need to be Christian nationalists because only that can stop the worldwide Jewish conspiracy, not to mention all the race mixing. I mean, that sound I just played is the milder version of what Gerald L.K. Smith was famous for. He was a virulent, violent racist and anti-Semite, and that was the core of his movement, Christian nationalism, which you'd think would make Christian nationalism kind of a hard thing for today's Republicans to try to raise as their new banner. You think that would be a hard thing. They apparently do not have any qualms, particularly from the Trumpiest members of Congress and particularly from the Republican nominee for governor in the swing state of Pennsylvania, a man named Doug Mastriano. He's been kind of a case study for months now, and Republicans actually trying to pull on their best Gerald L.K. Smith masks to make the Republican Party the Christian nationalist party he always wanted and that he spent all those sad decades trying to create. A paid consultant for the Doug Mastriano campaign, again, Mastriano is the Republican nominee for governor in Pennsylvania. The Republican Party has chosen him as their candidate for governor. A paid consultant for Mastriano's campaign is making headlines today, thanks to the watchdog group Media Matters, starting to document this guy's own pronouncements on the threat of the Jews and on the Christian nationalist movement as represented by candidates like his guy, Republican Doug Mastriano.
So, no, we don't want people who are atheists. We don't want people who are Jewish. This is an explicitly Christian movement because this is an explicitly Christian country. Now, we're not saying that, we're going to deport all these people or whatever. You're free to stay here, right? You're not going to be forced to convert or anything like this, but you're going to enjoy the fruits of living in a Christian society under Christian laws.
That is a consultant on the campaign for the Republican nominee for governor in Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, clarifying that it's not the plan to forcibly deport the Jews. Just to be clear, that's not the plan, for now. But Jews are not wanted. Jews are not part of the movement that this new Republican governor in Pennsylvania represents. So Jews, atheists, people of other faith, they won't be forcibly converted or deported. Now, that's not the plan for now. It's just that this is not for them, nor will this country be. Doug Mastriano is the Republican candidate for Pennsylvania governor. The Democratic candidate for Pennsylvania governor is Josh Shapiro. He's currently the Attorney General of the state. Josh Shapiro is going to be our guest here in just a few minutes tonight. We'll get his response to that and more. But it's been a busy news day, actually a busy few days. Since the last January 6th hearing, prime time on Thursday night, set off a bunch of proverbial bombshells, particularly on the right and in Republican politics. Today, one of the members of the January 6th investigation, Elaine Luria, posted online some additional footage from depositions and witness statements about President Trump's statement to the country on January 7th, which was the day after the attack by Trump supporters on the U.S. Capitol. Now, we've heard a little bit about this so far from the January 6th investigation. We know from testimony previously revealed by the investigation that part of the reason Trump agreed to even make a statement on January 7th, part of the reason he agreed to make a somewhat conciliatory statement about the attack that happened the day after it, is because he'd been advised that if he didn't do something like that, he might be thrown out of office immediately. The cabinet and the vice president really did seem ready to force him out of office using the 25th Amendment of the Constitution, by which they could declare him unfit and force him out. There has been testimony from the investigation thus far that Trump agreed reluctantly to give a speech on January 7th, basically to fend off that possibility. He agreed to give a speech saying, sort of, in a mealy-mouthed way, that maybe the violent riot at the Capitol building the previous day wasn't a totally awesome thing. I snark about that a little bit in terms of characterizing his feelings about it, because we've sort of earned the right to snark about it. We have enough insight into his feelings about that January 7th speech, because the investigation, among other things, released outtakes from his January 7th speech, showing him messing up, having a hard time reading some words, being frustrated with the speech content, but specifically showing him complaining about the parts of the speech that had been written for him that he did not want to say and that he was going to refuse to say.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday, and to those who broke the law, you will pay. You do not represent our movement, you do not represent our country, and if you broke the law, you can't say that. I already said you will pay. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defied the seat of justice. It's defiled, right? See, I can't see it very well. Okay, I'll do this. I'm going to do this. Let's go. But this election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
But Congress is certified. Now Congress is
Yeah,
certified.
right.
Now Congress
I didn't say over, so let me see. Go to the paragraph before. Okay?
I don't want to say the election is over. I don't want to say the election is over. Those outtakes are some of what we got from the January 6th investigators last week. Now today, there's no hearing today. There's no hearing scheduled for a few weeks from the January 6th investigation. But nevertheless, today, they released this.
I'm not sure when those conversations began because they could have started early the next morning, but I believe they started that evening, on the evening of the 6th.
I thought we should give the statement on the 7th and obviously move forward on transition.
I sat with her, I spoke to Miller about trying to put together some draft remarks for Jan 7 that we were going to present to the president to try to say. We felt like it was important to further call for de-escalation.
From what I understood at the time, and from what the reports were coming in, there's a large concern of the 25th Amendment potentially being invoked, and there were concerns about what would happen in the Senate if the 25th was invoked. So the primary reason that I had heard, other than, we did not do enough on the 6th, we need to get a stronger message out there and condemn this, otherwise this will be your legacy. The secondary reason to that was, think about what might happen in the final 15 days of your presidency if we don't do this. There's already talks about invoking the 25th Amendment. You need this as cover.
Do you recognize what this is?
It looks like a copy of a draft of the remarks for that day.
Okay. And as you can see throughout the document, there are lines crossed out. There are some there's some words added in. Do you recognize the handwriting?
It looks like my father's handwriting.
It looks like my father's handwriting, says Ivanka Trump. And luckily for us, He writes in gigantic capital letters in Sharpie, so it's very easy for all of us to read. And so we can now see easily what President Trump insisted he would not say, what he changed in the speech that was written for him to be delivered on January 7th, the day after the U.S. Capitol attack. The draft that he was given starts, good afternoon. He cut that out. Okay. Then it says, I would like to begin today by addressing, and he cuts the word today out of that. Okay. All fine. The draft then says he should say that he is outraged and sickened by the violence. He keeps the outrage. He drops and sickened. Okay, he's just outraged, not sickened, but we're basically still afloat here with the point of the speech until this next paragraph when we start to sink. The draft says, quote, I am directing the Department of Justice to ensure all lawbreakers are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We must send a clear message, not with mercy, but with justice. Legal consequences must be swift and firm. He cuts all of that. He will not say he's directing the Justice Department to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law, because, of course, he didn't do that, and he sure doesn't want to say that he's doing that. And here's the next bit that he cuts. The draft written for him for his speech on January 7th says, to those who engaged in acts of violence and destruction, quote, I want to be very clear, you do not represent me, you do not represent our movement. And if you broke the law, quote, you belong in jail. He cuts that. He won't say that the people who broke the law on January 6th, attacking the Capitol, belong in jail. And he won't even say that they don't represent him and they don't represent his movement. And you can see that all crossed out with his big Sharpie. And then you can see in his big all caps Sharpie handwriting where he swapped in his own language there. He did say, instead of you belong in jail, he did say, you will pay. You will pay. You will pay. By which presumably he meant you will pay for tickets into my next round of for-profit Trump rallies where I will praise you.
January 6th has become the Democrat Party's excuse to justify an unprecedented assault on American civil rights and liberties, appalling persecution of political prisoners. Another thing we'll do, and so many people have been asking me about it, if I run and if I win, we will treat those people from January 6th fairly. We will treat them fairly. And if it requires pardons, we will give them pardons because they are being treated so unfairly.
So right after the attack on the U.S. Capitol by his supporters, there's this draft speech written for him to give the next day. And he only gives it to try to avert himself being forcibly removed from office by the cabinet invoking the 25th Amendment. And that speech, the draft of that speech says, you don't represent me, you don't represent our movement, you belong in jail. He cuts all that and instead just says, you will pay. And then by the time he's talking about it at his rallies, not only is no one supposed to be paying anymore, now they're unfairly persecuted patriots who are all getting pardons if he gets to be president again. This is what happens when there are no consequences for trying to orchestrate this type of attack on the country. The January 6th investigation is not expected to do more public-facing hearings for a few weeks now. That said, nobody expected them to be releasing new material to the public like they did today, so perhaps that's an indication that we may not have to wait for more hearings several weeks from now for them to be continuing to tell the public more of what they know. Meanwhile, the other elements of this investigation and potential routes to accountability proceed in some interesting ways. Today, ABC News was first to report that a very senior person in the Trump White House, the vice president's chief of staff, a man named Mark Short, has newly given testimony, not to the January 6th investigation in Congress. We already knew he had talked to them. We've seen clips of Mark Short's testimony to them in earlier public hearings. Now, the ABC News scoop today was that Mark Short just gave sworn testimony to a federal grand jury, which means that Mark Short is the first Trump White House official that we know has been subpoenaed and has given testimony to a federal grand jury working with U.S. federal prosecutors from the Justice Department on potential indictments related to January 6th. Now, we don't know exactly what that means. We don't know what Vice President Pence's chief of staff testified to the grand jury about. We don't even know which of what are reportedly several federal grand juries working on this he might have testified to. But it is a rare sign of life, a rare sort of proof of life moment from the U.S. Department of Justice in terms of whether they're doing anything, whether anybody other than just the rioters themselves might ever face any sort of criminal charges related to this effort to overthrow the government by force to keep Trump in power. Relatedly, in Georgia today, there was a setback for the Georgia state prosecutor who's using a special grand jury there to investigate the attempts to overthrow the presidential election results in that state. It's a setback for this prosecutor, but a very, very specific one. And I feel like a lot of the news coverage about this today was sort of overwritten in terms of its implications for this investigation. The district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, Fani Willis, has been told today by the judge overseeing the grand jury in that case that she is free to proceed with investigations and potential prosecutions of all of the fake Trump electors from the state of Georgia, all of whom have received target letters from Fani Willis telling them they might be indicted in the scandal. The judge has thus far cleared her to proceed with all of those investigations and potential prosecutions, except for one of the fake electors. One of the fake electors is a Republican candidate for lieutenant governor in Georgia right now. And this district attorney, Fani Willis, apparently held a fundraiser for one of the Democratic candidates who was running in the Democratic primary to try to be his opponent in the general election. Because of that, the judge said today in Georgia that some other prosecutor, some other DA can pursue that investigation of that one guy and can pursue that possible prosecution of that one guy, but not Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis because it is too much of a conflict of interest for her. Again, just for that one potential defendant. So again, that is a setback for Fani Willis's investigation in Georgia, but it's a really specific one that only applies to that one subject of her investigation, and it really doesn't appear to impact the rest of her case. But, you know, bigger picture here. Just as it seems like the investigations and potential prosecutions for what happened on January 6th, they're stretching on and on and on and on. I think a considerable section of the public is getting sort of impatient to see if people at the top are actually going to pay any price for what they did, or if it's just going to be the low-level people who physically went into the Capitol that day. Just as that is stretching on and on and on. On the other side of it, the effort to overthrow the last presidential election and reinstall Trump in power, that effort not only isn't just, you know, in the distant past at this point, it's literally ongoing. The week before last, the leader of the Wisconsin State Assembly told reporters, that Trump had called him and told him 2 weeks ago that he needed to decertify the results of Wisconsin's presidential election from 2020 now, which seemed insane that Trump was still making calls like that as recently as 2 weeks ago. But then over the weekend, look at this. We learned that in Wisconsin, the Republican who's the leader of the elections committee in that state assembly, she agrees with Trump. She wants to do it. She thinks they should decertify. And so now Wisconsin Republicans are trying to figure out, I guess, if they can call some sort of special legislative session to try to undo the 2020 election results 2 years down the road. They want to do that now, because Trump is still pressuring them to do it. And so some of them, at least, want to. It's not over for them. A lot of impatience in the rest of the country as to whether or not people who tried to orchestrate this coup are ever going to pay for it. The coup orchestration efforts, meanwhile, persist. I mentioned at the top of the show that we're going to have Josh Shapiro here in just a moment. He's the Attorney General in Pennsylvania. He's the Democratic nominee for governor in Pennsylvania, now running against a Republican Christian nationalist a la Gerald L.K. Smith. And don't ask what that means for Jewish people in Pennsylvania. I should tell you, Doug Mastriano, that Republican candidate, the Christian nationalist guy, he himself was at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. He himself has been subpoenaed by the January 6th investigation. But at home in Pennsylvania right now, I mean, the fight continues. There are 3 Republican-led counties in Pennsylvania that right now are still refusing to certify the election results from the Pennsylvania primaries that happened there more than a month ago. They just say they're not going to count some of the votes that they disapprove of. They're just not sending in certified vote totals for those votes that they want disallowed. Now, that's happening right now. That's ongoing. And we study the past, we study the recent past, in part because we have a justice interest in accountability for past wrongs, so that people who do bad stuff don't get away with it and keep doing it and perceive their impunity as a green light to do worse. That's why we don't let ourselves get distracted just by the latest shiny object. We stay focused on bad stuff, big bad stuff that requires accountability. We also study the more distant past, right, to learn from what previous generations have confronted before us. Christian nationalism is not a new idea on the American right. We know exactly where it went very quickly. The last time they brought it up, seems like it's going there that time. It seems like it's going there this time too. In this story, though, in this age, in this particular story about accountability for the forcible attempt to overthrow the U.S. government, it kind of just feels like the past won't leave us alone. It won't leave us alone. The distant past, it won't leave us alone. The more recent past, this thing that we keep trying to move past as a country, it won't stop. We've got more to come. We'll be right back. Stay with us. It was October 27th, 2018, the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 11 people murdered by a gunman who stormed into their synagogue during services. On that day, on that Saturday morning, 2018, right before he walked into the synagogue and shot and killed those 11 people, the very last thing that shooter did was write a post on a specific social media site, a site called Gab. What he posted was a screed against Jewish people, just the latest in months and months and months of anti-Semitic rants he had been posting to Gab. His bio on Gab said, quote, "Jews are the children of Satan." That's the sort of account description that might have raised red flags on a normal website, but it's sort of par for the course at Gab. Gab markets itself as the destination for people who've been kicked off of other social media sites, white nationalists, QAnon folks, anti-Semites, Holocaust deniers, all the best people. In the aftermath of the Tree of Life massacre, as everybody's attention turned to this online cesspool, Gab's founder bragged that the site was getting its highest traffic ever after the shooting. Turns out the massacre was great for Gab. That guy, the founder of Gab, is a real peach. After 10 African-American people were killed in a Buffalo supermarket earlier this year, he endorsed the shooter's online grievances about black people and Jews supposedly replacing white Americans. The founder of Gab said the solution was for white people to have more white babies. The Gab.com guy uses his own account on the site to promote the most violent anti-Semitic attacks and conspiracy theories. That Jews are engaged in white genocide and that a cabal of Jews secretly controls the government and the media, and there are legitimately differing opinions about whether the Holocaust happened or not. And because of that, a whole lot of people in the state of Pennsylvania did a spit take a few days ago, and they learned that that same guy, that guy is being paid by the Republican nominee for governor of Pennsylvania. Doug Mastriano paid $5,000 to Gab for campaign consulting fees. What kind of campaign consulting is this guy doing for Pennsylvania's Republican nominee for governor? I'm going to guess it's not minority outreach, but who knows? The Gab guy says it was for Doug Mastriano for governor ads on Gab. But we know that Doug Mastriano also got a few other things. He got an endorsement from Gab's founder during the Republican primary. I'm sure that helped him win over the coveted virulent anti-Semite demographic. Gab's founder also interviewed Mastriano, during which much praise was exchanged. Doug Mastriano told the Gab guy, quote, "Thank God for what you've done." Doug Mastriano also got himself thousands of followers on Gab because, according to reporting by the Huffington Post, Gab set it up so every single new user at Gab.com automatically follows Doug Mastriano. Well, given the clientele of Gab.com, that means that when Doug Mastriano posts about his campaign for governor on the site, he gets tons and tons of comments that are explicitly anti-Semitic attacks on his Democratic opponent for governor, Pennsylvania's Attorney General Josh Shapiro, who happens to be Jewish. Now, Doug Mastriano has not offered any comment on any of this. We have reached out to him for comment. We have not heard anything, but we live in hope. Thanks to the liberal watchdog group Media Matters, we know that the Gab guy, the Doug Mastriano campaign consultant, he's happy to talk about all of this.
This is our guy, and this is Pennsylvania's guy, and he's going to turn this state around for the glory of God. This isn't a Big Tent. This is a Christian movement, full stop. So, no, we don't want people who are atheists. We don't want people who are Jewish.
Campaign consultant to the Republican nominee for governor of the great state of Pennsylvania. In 2022, this year, in our lifetimes. Joining us now is the Democratic nominee for governor of Pennsylvania, Attorney General Josh Shapiro. Mr. Attorney General, thank you for making time tonight. I am sort of sorry to be speaking to you under these circumstances, but I appreciate your willingness to do it.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate being on here.
Let me just ask your response to this series of revelations about your Republican opponent. He's formed not just a sort of political alliance, but what appears to be a financial relationship and an ongoing politically strategic relationship with Gab.com, and including through today when the guy has continued to assert that there's no role for Jews in the political culture of America.
I mean, Rachel, this is who Doug Mastriano is. He is so dangerous. He is so extreme. He is so beyond the pale that he would go and ask for followers, pay for supporters of his campaign, recruit volunteers on the site that was used by the Tree of Life killer, the deadliest attack on the Jewish people in United States history, which occurred in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, just a couple years ago. This site, this Gab site, is a haven for white supremacy. And yet this is where Doug Mastriano believes he needs to go for support, for recruits to his campaign. Rachel, we cannot allow this to become normal, just normal political practice. This is not normal. It's not normal that Mastriano is on that site, and it's not normal that he trades in this direct, blatant anti-Semitism and racism that fills the pages of Gab. This is not normal, and I think it's indicative of the approach he would take to being governor here in Pennsylvania, the kind of chaos and division that he would bring if ever given the chance to lead this Commonwealth.
When I was talking about these developments in the news in the previous segment and in this introduction here, I kept finding myself stumbling over the word nominee because a lot of people can run for things. You know, a lot of people are candidates for anything, and you get all sorts of wheat and chaff in large candidate fields. But this is the Republican nominee for governor. This is who the Republican Party has chosen to run against you to become governor of the state. Is it possible that the Republican Party didn't know what they were getting into with him? Is this a form of radicalism and extremism from Mr. Mastriano that was not evident before they chose him to be their nominee?
No, folks knew exactly who he was when they picked him. He received over 40% in a field of 9 or 10 candidates. This is the modern day base of the Republican Party. Now, the good news is many Republicans are breaking from him. We had just the other day 9 Republican leaders in the state join our campaign. There will be many more to come. Folks who certainly don't agree with me on every issue, but they know that what Mastriano is doing is a threat to our democracy. It's beyond the pale. It's not normal, and it should not be acceptable in our politics today. Democrats, Republicans, independents here in Pennsylvania are stepping up and saying that is simply too far. We don't want the kind of chaos he would bring to our politics here in Pennsylvania. So on the one hand, I think it's deeply troublesome that the base of the Republican Party chose him overwhelmingly to be their nominee. On the other hand, what's been clear since he received the nomination is that just the sheer number of Republicans and independents who have said, that's too much. We're not willing to go that far. We're not willing to accept that. We see the flashing red light out there that Doug Mastriano is, and we refuse to look away. We refuse to ignore it. We're going to stand up to it. That's what's encouraging about where we are in our politics today.
Pennsylvania Attorney General, the Democratic nominee for governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Attorney General, I appreciate it. Again, it's painful for me to talk to you about this stuff, knowing what it means in your state in terms of the danger that this stuff stirs up, also knowing the personal attack that's behind it. But thank you for being willing to talk about it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, much more ahead for tonight. Stay with us. When Russia started its war in Ukraine, the first big city they managed to control was a southern port city called Kherson. Despite fierce Ukrainian resistance in the north and around the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, Russian troops were able to capture Kherson in the south just a week into the war. Well, now it's 5 months into the war, and aided by some new high-powered American weaponry, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is promising a counteroffensive to retake Kherson, to kick Russian troops out of that whole region. President Zelensky said this weekend that Ukrainian troops are advancing step by step, that they've liberated 44 towns in the Kherson region so far. They are doing so in part thanks to a new weapon they have just started using, a weapon called HIMARS. Short for High Mobility Artillery Rocket Systems. HIMARS are long-range, precision-guided artillery launchers made in the United States. They've been provided to the Ukrainian military by the United States government. And basically the way they work is it's pretty understandable even for those of us in a civilian context. This is a launcher that's mounted on a standard U.S. military truck. It takes just a 4-man crew to operate. But this thing can fire munitions with a range of about 50 miles, the way they've been equipped and shipped to Ukraine. About a 50-mile range. But then importantly, as soon as it has fired its shot, the truck can take off. So the launcher won't be vulnerable to routine fire. Within 2 minutes of a HIMARS firing its shot, this truck-mounted launcher can be speeding away from the firing location at 60 miles per hour. So they can fire at long range in a very precise, guided way, and then they can get away without having the weapon taken off the battlefield by return fire from the enemy. Now, the Washington Post reported this weekend, quote, the HIMARS have been so effective that the Russian Defense Ministry has ordered commanders to prioritize them for targeting. The U.S. has sent a dozen of these HIMARS to Ukraine. The administration just said it'll be sending 4 more for a total of 16. It's possible that the Germans and the British are maybe sending a handful more. But Ukraine says these weapons are game-changing for them, and they need a lot more. The Ukrainian Minister of Defense just said, quote, for an effective counteroffensive, we need at least 100. He said, quote, that would be a game-changer. It's clear that U.S.-provided weapons on the ground in Ukraine are already on the ground in Ukraine are doing the work they were intended to do. Ukraine was able to take out a Russian ship on the Black Sea. They were eventually able to recapture Snake Island with a U.S.-made Harpoon missile. Using these HIMARS systems, Ukraine was able to destroy an important Russian command center for aerial operations that they say has drastically reduced Russian artillery fire from over the horizon. A congressional delegation that visited Ukraine this weekend also got to see how those weapons are being used. Among them was Democratic Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin. She has a special connection with Ukraine, as her state, Michigan, has a large Ukrainian-American population. But her state is also one of the places where soldiers are trained in how to use the HIMARS system. She made a point of that during her visit by giving President Zelensky a challenge coin from a HIMARS unit of the Michigan National Guard. Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin is just back from Kyiv. She joins us next. Stay with us. Before becoming a member of Congress, she did 3 tours in Iraq as a militia expert for the CIA. She's also held a bunch of senior defense and intelligence positions, including a senior post at the Pentagon. But now she's a congresswoman and a member of the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committees. Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan is just back from Ukraine. In Ukraine, she met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his senior aides. Topic 1 of their conversations were American advanced rocket systems that the Ukrainians say could change the game enough to enable them to win the war against Russia. These are rocket systems that have a direct connection to Representative Slotkin's home state of Michigan. Representative Alyssa Slotkin, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you making the time.
Thanks for having me.
So you've got an impressive defense and intelligence background, and I'm sure this stuff is easy for you to follow, easy for you to grok in terms of all the jargon and everything. But can you explain to our audience why it is that the Ukrainian government and President Zelensky are so interested in this one U.S. weapons system that they have just started to obtain, and that does have a connection to your home state of Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically gives them the ability for precision fires in a way that they just didn't have before. You know, you talked about the range, 50 miles. I think what's been interesting is that the Russians have backed up that range, right? Those 50 miles. It's pushed them back in a way that I think it's been different. And it just brings them a new capability that's longer range, more precise. And then those HIMARS can move, as you said, it's scoot and shoot, or shoot and scoot. And they can just get out of where they were. And they're very accurate, and so it's just bringing a new capability to them that they haven't had before, and they're using to good effect.
Do you believe that the U.S. is capable of shipping them a lot more? I don't know much about these weapons in terms of what the procurement process is like. From what I'm able to read in sort of open source stuff, it seems like they're about $5 million a pop. It seems like there are sort of open source estimates that maybe the U.S. has a few hundred of them in our arsenal. But they've been around for decades. They've been around since the 90s. It's not like they're a brand new, highly precision weapon that we've only got a handful of. Do you think we're capable of giving them as many more as they want?
Well, no, not as many more as they want. And when you're talking about hundreds upon hundreds, I mean, the planners at the Pentagon have to make sure that we don't cut into bone for U.S. defenses, right? That we don't leave ourselves vulnerable. We're giving the Ukrainians a lot of different things, including HIMARS. And so the Pentagon has to make decisions all the time on what can we give them from our inventory? Do other partner nations have similar systems that they can give them? I did this with the counter-ISIS campaign. It's often, you know, figuring out what kind of risk you can take. I think there is a question on the table about whether we give them a longer range rocket that goes on the same HIMARS. It's called an ATACMS. It would be a longer range, 190 miles instead of 50. That's something that's the Ukrainians asked us for. President Zelensky asked us for. It's something that I know the administration is having conversations about. I'm certainly in support of that. But, you know, it's not any one system that's going to make a counteroffensive work, particularly in a place like, you know, southern Ukraine. It's got to be a whole lot of things that come together. And it's a complicated thing to go and take back territory when the Russians have, you know, really tried to dig themselves in down south.
Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, who just returned from Ukraine, including meeting with President Zelensky. Thanks for helping us understand this. I feel like Americans do really care about this war. Being able to understand the decisions that the American government can make about what we can do and what we can't is a really important part of staying engaged with the reality here. Thanks for helping us understand.
Thanks.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. That's going to do it for us tonight. Thanks for being here with us. Now it's time for The Last Word, where Ayman Mohaldin is in for Lawrence tonight. Good evening, Ayman. Nice to see you.